Warning: tuning your vehicle can be a dangerous activity, and there is substantial risk involved. The dangers include, but are not limited to, permanently damaging your vehicle, injury or death to yourself or other people, damaging personal property due to paying attention to a laptop while driving. This video is intended for educational purposes only. Before altering the calibration of your vehicle, you should verify it is in proper working and mechanical condition. Have a working basis of knowledge of how your vehicle works and how the components interrelate, and understand how your tuning software works. Bottom line, you and only you are responsible for making your own decisions, as well as accepting the consequences of those decisions. I cannot be held accountable for your actions. All right, guys, welcome back to my collection of pixels here to make my car faster and hopefully make your car faster and better as well. Today, we're going to be talking about torque management as it relates to shifting. So the first place we're going to jump into is the transmission tab over here, and under the torque management tab, general. Now at this point, the only thing I would suggest doing is just changing this speed control terminate. Most likely the factory has it set to torque ramp. We want it set to immediate. And all that's doing is causing the ignition timing to drop out and drop back in like a light switch, just on and off. Whereas torque ramp is going to be more like a rheostat when you're adjusting the lights in your house, and you're going to turn it down and then you're going to rotate it to turn it back up. It's slow, relatively slow, but we just want an on-off light switch. Boom, immediate. So from there, we need to go to this upshift tab. I would recommend leaving this all completely factory. Whatever you have for torque factor, which should all be 1, and these adders, just leave that as factory as well. Same thing for the cold multiplier and the adder modifier. Just leave those things alone. Now, this is how it was factory on my car, which is a 2014 Chevy SS sedan, aka Holden Commodore. Shout out to all the crazy Aussies down there. But if we were to actually, let's do this. Let's open a compare. I have a 2007 Corvette, and you can see they actually do have some numbers in here that are different than mine, even and down here in the adder modifier as well. So, oh, the breakpoints are just different, but they're still all zeros. So no big deal. But you can see there are some differences. So whatever you have, don't make it like mine. Just leave it stock. Let me go back to my compare real quick. All right. Now, the other thing I'm going to call out is you notice we have an upshift tab and there is no downshift tab. So I would imagine there is a downshift section to the ECM, TCM that we cannot see, that's not exposed through HP tuners. And I'm going to go ahead and guess that all of these hidden values are set to 1 and we just can't change them. So if you come in here and you start setting these to 0.5 or whatever value you want to, now all of a sudden, going back to kind of at the beginning when I said I always want my transmission to be predictable and no surprises. So now we have the upshift is going to pull out half the torque reduction, but downshift is going to be calling out 100% torque reduction. Probably not a huge deal or end of the world, but again, we're setting up a scenario where there's differences that we can and can't control and are hidden, and we're guessing. So I would encourage you to set these all back to 1. As far as I know, the factory always use 1s for all of these. All right. So what does this 1 mean? So 1 means 100%, 0 means 0%, and then 0.5 means 50%. So what is that going to? That's going to this engine tab over here. On the Spark tab, Advance, you have 2 tables. We have the base table, and then we have this torque management table. Now, this one here, minimum final spark, as you can guess, is acting like a cap or a limit. And so you can see in here, it's saying this is the first table that it looks at, and it's commanding in some scenarios. We want to go negative 25 degrees on the timing. But this is saying, well, you can't actually do that. I'm going to limit you. You can't go beyond negative 20. So all of these, in fact, is not in practice going to be negative 25. They're going to be negative 20. So that's one thing to remember. So, uh, and as you can tell, this is a factory tune and they're mismatched. So I would encourage you when you set yours up, you can, you should make a match, right? And so if this was mine, if this was what I was actually using, I would change all of these negative 25s to 20. Now, you can, in some situations, in an emergency, maybe you're at the track and you just want to change some things. Maybe you could say, you know what, I'm just want to do 0 for all of these things right here to make them pull out less timing. And then maybe come back and adjust these later. So you can do that as kind of a quick test here and there. Now, when we look at this, this is kind of a goofy little graph, and you have kind of a sharp peak, a little shark fin up there. I don't know why, it seems goofy to me. But there are other things going on in the factory tune. So when you look at flex fuel, now mine from the factory is zeroed out. Um, Gas, so you notice there are other things going on that may be adders and multipliers, especially when you get here to IAT, ECT type stuff, and even the catalyst stuff that may kind of either, when we get back over to here, it may either knock this shark fin down up here or maybe it fills it back in. But it's not that it's changing this, it's changing the starting point. So what this does is when we look here into the high octane table, which is most likely where we are going to be driving, cruising around or whatever, it's going to say, all right, so for instance, we'll just use this because it's easy. It's right up here. So it says, not that we'd ever be running at 0 RPMs, but if we had 28 degrees of timing or whatever it is, and let's go back over here to the minimum base, and now this says negative 10. Well, so 100% torque reduction is going to say, well, you're going to start at 28 and you're going to go down to negative 10. Now, if we were at 50%, and I'm going to try to do math, that's a 38-degree differential. Well, 38 divided by 2 is going to be 18. 18, that's 36. I don't know. Whatever. Gosh darn it. Let's see. I'm trying to think on the fly while people are listening, and 19 degrees. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So if we had that table here in the trans, this torque factor here set to 0.5, then it would say 19 degrees is halfway between 28 and negative 10. But this is a global change. And you can leave this and you can edit these things, but this is a global change for this 1-2 shift, meaning everything, no matter where you are on this scale of RPMs and air mass, we're just going to cut it in half, which is okay, but adjusting this minimum final spark really allows you to fine tune things for drivability. This whole area, this orange and yellow area, this is like your cruising, driving stuff, your off idle stuff, parking lot stuff. This is the stuff you're going to notice when you're driving. Wide open throttle, you're probably not really going to feel a whole lot of a difference, right? But um, so keep that in mind. So when we look at this, it's no surprise that we're saying, hey, the stuff you're going to feel, this torque reduction, we don't want to reduce as much torque. We want to keep timing in there so it feels like a nice, crisp, fast, firm shift. Wide open throttle, this is less about drivability, but more about protecting the transmission. So you're ultimately going to have to come in here. I'll show you how I have mine set up, by the way. If you look at this, so you can see here my drivability index, basically I'm at positive 4 degrees, kind of sneaking down here to 2 degrees. But it's not really feasible, after 4,000 degree or 4,000 RPMs that I'm not going to be shifting up in here. This is probably more you've accelerated down here and then you've chopped the throttle and then your RPMs are sneaking back up here, right? And that may be kind of a harsh shift. So we don't necessarily want a lot of timing. But down here, this is wide open, so you can see I'm shifting at negative 10 degrees. So ultimately, you're going to have to decide what you feel safe at in terms of preservation of the transmission. Up here, not a lot of RPMs, not a lot of air mass. there's not a lot of torque, so there's not a whole lot of worry about damaging the car. So this is more about drivability, and this is protection. So you kind of come up with your own scheme. I kind of started here looking at this at the factory one, and I said, okay, well, the factory's feeling safe about 0. So I think I just kind of interpolated all this over and shifted that to kind of fill in the gaps. And then I'm like, well, we can probably, this is basically 0. So let's make this 0. And we'll keep going the trends here, fill this in, and then this, maybe we'll just interpolate all the way down to 25. And then, just if you can leave these lines if you want or smooth them out, but then start from there and say, well, you know what? It's still kind of a weird shift going on up to 2000 RPM. So maybe I'll just make this 2. And so that's kind of how I arrived at that little stair step that you see in my chart here. So you're going to need to adjust it. The larger the number, aka more positive, the less torque reduction you'll have and the better it will shift. Now, part of the reason why I have these set so high as positive numbers is because I have kind of a large camshaft. And when the timing is too low, it misfires and it coughs and sputters. It doesn't sound great, but it's also a very slow recovery, trying to get those RPMs pumped back up from a low timing. It's just a slow, lazy recovery. So hopefully, your exhaust is set up in a way that you're able to hear those details of the cam struggling as it tries to recover. And keep in mind, I mean, I wouldn't get too worried about it because in the end, if you're misfiring and the engine's coughing and sputtering, you're not making any power at all. So you're kind of going too far. Like you've gone past negative or 0 foot-pounds and you're going into the negative foot-pounds. Either way, negative foot-pounds is a big differential to what the car is expecting, and it may upset the apple cart, so to speak. So again, we want that smooth, quick shift, and you're going to notice it here in this low RPM range. So you're going to need to set your scanner up while you're driving, and you're going to need to look at as you shift where this air mass is. And now we go back to it goes without saying, you got to have the basics set up for your car for air mass. So your math better be bang on, and your virtual volumetric efficiency better be bang on too. Now, I do have another video how to tune VE, virtual VE, and math at the same time using dynamic air. Highly recommend you check it out because if your air mass isn't right, then all this is going to be wonky. And not only is this controlling the timing, but it's also being referenced in the torque, the virtual torque, and the calculated torque, which we will get to in a little bit. So a lot of things are dependent on your air mass being correct, aside from your actual fuel injectors as well. Okay, so now let's dig in to this PowerPoint and kind of go over some other finer details of this stuff so I can explain it a little bit better. Okay, if you saw my last video, which was the addendum to shift time and pressure, you've already seen this slide before. For those that you haven't, I would definitely recommend checking it out. I wouldn't say it's required for this video, but definitely is good in general. But just to recap, so this 45-degree line is going to represent the ideal or perfect shift, completely neutral. Or maybe think about it as if you never shifted and you just kind of continued on that same feel and you never shifted. It just kept kind of going. This thick black line is going to represent the real world. The car shifted. You're going to feel it. And so this would be kind of what I would graphically represent as what a factory shift feels like. It's very safe, very slow, not very positive feeling, just kind of wishy-washy. So when we break it down into time, if the torque converter is locked, it will unlock. And then we're going to apply torque management, which is to say we are going to reduce the engine torque, which we will discuss in depth today. And then the oncoming clutch will fill, adaptives are being used. The offgoing clutch will disengage, adaptives are being used. The turbine acceleration will be characterized, and this is what the last video, that addendum, was talking about. And then the oncoming clutch will engage and adaptives are there. All of those four things are encapsulated. That's like kind of internal to the transmission of what's going on. After that's done, then torque management is removed, which is to say the normal torque is restored. And that's external to the transmission as that's related to the engine. And so that's what we're talking about today. And then optionally, the torque converter will lock back up if conditions are met and it needs to do that. So this torque management here has a huge impact of what your shift is going to feel like. You can have the fastest shift internal to the transmission, but if the torque reduction isn't working together with that shift, it's not going to feel very good, right? This is really what you feel, this torque management. So let's talk about, I know we're talking about torque management today, but while we're doing this wonky graph thing that I've completely made up, let's talk about circle back to too much pressure. So if you've commanded too much pressure, whether you've turned adaptives off, which I would not recommend, or the transmission has not had a chance to adapt down, this is kind of what it's going to feel like. You're going to get that initial, hey, we got to pull some torque out, we got to do the shift, and then it's going to slam those clutches and it's going to be violent. And you're going to get this oscillation, this rocking back and forth, just like if you botched a shift in a manual transmission and you get that lurching and rocking and bouncing. You don't want that. Why have a state of the art automatic transmission if it's going to shift like garbage? Now, what about too long of a shift time? Here we can see if it's going to take forever, the car is going to slow down quite a bit and you're going to feel it. And you're going to kind of rock forward a little bit. And then the clutch is going to drop. And then you're going to get slammed back in your seat and you're going to get that feel. For a really slow one, you're going to hear the RPMs kind of start to flare up a little bit. And we definitely don't want that. So, what about no torque management? So, if you eliminate torque management, which I would recommend that you never do, this is going to what it's going to feel like, and you're going to feel the normal shift happen. And then with no torque management, the engine's still making full power, but those clutches are going to engage and they're going to start to slip. And then the shaft differential between the input shaft of the engine and the input or the output shaft, or I should say the crankshaft of the engine and the input shaft of the transmission are mismatched. But then they will slowly, as the RPMs bleed off from the crank and go to the transmission, you're going to get that feel. And I found a spot actually in my tune. I was looking at a graph for I was at the drag strip and I was logging the transmission input shaft RPM, turbine RPM, same thing, and the engine RPMs, and you can kind of see this little blip here. So we definitely don't want this to happen either. This is clutches slipping, damaging, and that's not good, right? Because it's putting that friction material in your trans fluid and it's sending it throughout the system. But that slipping is also producing heat. And, heat is kind of the enemy of the automatic transmission. So we definitely don't want uh, too much torque management or too much torque reduction. As I was saying before, if you pull out too much timing, it's really that engine's going to start to cough and sputter, and we don't want that either. It sounds like garbage, but aside from the transmission doing a fast shift, if the engine's going to take forever to recover to get out of that misfire, then what's the point of having a fast shift? So we want to avoid that as well. So the idea is a great shift will be fast and smooth with minimal um, impact to the feel of the car. So hitting this perfect line is probably not realistic, um, at least in a broad sense. Like you could probably do it, but it would take forever to dial that in for all RPMs, all torque ranges, all gears. That's going to be tough. So, close enough, I hate to say, is what you need to aim for. So balancing of torque reduction. So up here, if we had no torque reduction, right, the clutches are going to slip, or they're going to be unhappy, but it's going to feel great. You're going to like the way the car drives. But maximum torque reduction, the clutches will be happy, but you're not going to be happy with the way the car is driving. And when I say maximum torque reduction. Ideally, this is going to be where the crankshaft and the input shaft and the output shaft all are doing the same RPM. So it's a totally neutral feel to the clutches. Think about the clutches. So as they engage and disengage, as soon as that happens, is there a differential in shaft speed? That is going to be what the ideal perfect torque reduction is going to be. Your goal is to kind of get into this safe zone up here. Um, so low RPMs, drivability, where I was showing you before, I had positive 4 degrees of timing. Not a lot of torque reduction, but it's also not really needed because we're not making a lot of torque. High RPMs, wide open throttle, you're going to have to pull that timing back a little bit more. So this is what this looks like in practice, as I already showed you. Just for recap, this is your idle area and kind of your cruising off idle, gliding through some stop signs in the neighborhood where you want that invisible, seamless 1, 2, 3 shift to kind of get you going. And this is wide open throttle down here, which I have to -10 degrees. So we can actually, though, think about, well, aside from controlling the timing is really just controlling the torque. So we're basically indirectly controlling the torque. So we can actually start to map this out. So over on the left, I have the minimum final spark table, and then I have the virtual torque tables over here. Now, as you go through this exercise, and you don't have to do this, but I just want to show you where all of these things are. And if you're a dork like me with a lot of time on your hands and you want to start mapping this out, just be aware that the RPM breakpoints are different. And over here, the air mass is in grams. But here, when you have this set to air mass, it is in milligrams. So you just move the decimal place. So um, zero point 0.2 over here is the same thing as 200 over here. No big deal. But also keep in mind there's mass, there's map, and then you have the corresponding tables for E85 as well. But this is going on air mass, not map. So from there, then we can look at and find the equivalent. So for -10, here's my -10 table. So I can say, okay, well, at 6,400 RPMs and 800, right? We can say, okay, here's the 800 and here's 6,400. It's saying you're shifting at 107 foot-pounds. So you can start making this map here. And now, what about these oddball ones like 2? Well, you can change this min and the max and change the increment. So when you really want to dial in, you can change this increment to 1. And this 10, you can see it goes -10, 0, +10. Those are steps of 10. But if you wanted to see like 2 degrees, you could set the minimum to 0 and the maximum to 3, or maximum to 3, and then put the increment as 1. And then it will just show you one table for each one of those. So you can look this stuff up. The decimals are going to be, you're not going to be able to do. So you're just going to have to round. So I went through the exercise. Okay, well, let's take that and now let's put that into a 3D graph and kind of see what this looks like. So here, this idle zone, you can see I'm kind of in here. This flat area is going to be 0. So you can see, and like I said, with the cell breakpoints, like my idle is set for 700 RPMs, but I have a 400 and an 800, but over here we go 550 to 750. So I tried to mentally interpolate just a little bit. And so you can see it's kind of a rough area here, but in general, it looks like it's shifting either 0 or, slightly negative here. So pretty safe. When I get on the gas and I start cruising, now we bump up into this area, and then wide open throttle, we drop down up here. This area, I had no idea until I went through this exercise that -10 degrees with this much air mass is predicted by virtual torque to be so high. So I could probably, and it's unreachable, right? But maybe for my own sanity, I may drop this down quite a bit after seeing this. So that is how you would map that. You don't need to do this, but I thought for the sake of this video, I would go through that exercise and kind of show you. We'll talk a little bit more about virtual torque anyway. So anyway, we'll move on. All right, so I've mentioned torque quite a bit, but we haven't really talked too much about how this relates to other areas of shifting. We touched on torque reduction and how that relates to shift feel, but there's also some other things that we need to talk about. So back in the transmission tab under shift pressures, when we look at upshift, we can see up here, this is interpolating based off of engine torque to determine how much pressure. You can see the kPa value, these kPa values. Well, how much pressure do we throw at the transmission? Well, that's going to be based on the prevailing torque. And same thing for downshift and even in adaptives. When we look at this oncoming pressure preset, remember we have the 0 and the 1, and that kind of relates to the general idea about this discrete shift torque. And we have certain breakpoints depending where we're at, and then that puts us in the low, medium, or high range here. But all this is dealing with engine torque to determine how much pressure do we throw at the transmission for any situation. Now, how does the computer know how much torque it's got on its hands at any given moment? Well, I believe, and this is my understanding, this may be somewhat flawed, it may be spot on, but I'm going to show you what I think is going on here. In the scanner, you can see that there is a PID, there's actually two for engine torque. There's engine torque and there's delivered engine torque. I think pretty much they should be the exact same thing. One's probably SAE. In fact, let's take a look while we're digging in here. So there is, yeah, in delivered torque and engine torque. One may be SAE or not. And let's look at this real quick. We'll go on a side tangent here. Where is my torque value? Engine torque right here. Let me spell it correctly. Okay, so we have delivered torque and engine torque, and you notice they both have this arrow here. So this is a polling channel, meaning the scanner is going to request from the engine, hey, how much torque do you have? And then it will reply back. This barometric pressure, you notice it only has one arrow. That's a broadcast PID. So that means basically the computer is broadcasting out on the CAN bus network. Hey, anybody that wants to know, here's how much barometric pressure we have. So I'm guessing one of these is SAE and the other one is not. All right, let's go back to this log here. Oops, the wrong one. All right. So from my understanding, this torque PID that we have over here is essentially like steady state. It's calculated. And if you watched my video on dealing with dynamic air, um, uh, uh, like adjusting your MAF and your virtual volumetric efficiency at the same time, you'll know that the engine says, hey, under steady state conditions, I like the MAF sensor. That mass airflow sensor is amazing. Under transient conditions, I cannot rely on the mass airflow sensor, and I need to go back to the virtual volumetric efficiency table to predict how much air is going in and out of the engine. So I believe this torque is the same way. This is a calculated value. And if we go back in here into the engine side and we go to Spark, we have this max torque timing. And this is, and you notice down here, if I can go down here, it says, torque timing theoretical, max advance that delivers torque, blah, blah, blah. We do not recommend adjusting this table. So I know some tuners do adjust it. They have a steady state dyno, variable load, so on and so forth. They can adjust the timing and they can find where that engine is making maximum torque. So I would imagine this comes into play for steady state as well as probably a few other factors involved. And then the engine knows about how much torque it's making based off of the air mass. However, during the shift, everything goes crazy and we have a lot of transients going on. But more importantly, the engine needs to know, hey, I need to drop down to 56 foot-pounds of torque. Well, how do I achieve that? And that's where these virtual volumetric or virtual torque tables come into. Now, these are ruled by coefficients, just like the virtual volumetric efficiency. So You can see we have a range from -10 to +40. And this is here. So if I don't want to see that, maybe I just say, you know what, show me 1 through 10 and show me increments of 2. And so, oh, well, it would help if I do this correctly. And we want increments of 2. So there we go. We got 0 through 10 and then increments of 2. So this is, you can't just set these to anything you want. If you do, you you'll impact all of them as well because they're ruled by coefficients. Now, I would say the virtual torque table in general, probably you shouldn't be messing with this. If you have a mechanically stock vehicle and you're just doing a tune only, don't touch them. If you're full bolt on, you got the long tube headers, the intake manifold, cold air intake, fancy spark plug wires, and a bunch of stickers, still, I would not touch this thing. Once you, even if you get a baby cam, probably you'd be fine leaving this alone. But once you start getting into larger cams, and certainly you get into power adder type stuff, you're going to need to bump these up. For me, I'll show you what I did, right or wrong. Judge me if you will. Um, we'll just set this back to stock, or maybe not stock, but how HP Tuners renders this for you initially. I went through here and, I said, I think I bumped everything up 25%. So I just multiplied here and then I didn't do anything to the low one because I'm cam only. So it's not going to make a lot of power down low. It's really a high end type cam. So then I just interpolated down and then extrapolate and then calculate, and then I'm done. This made a gigantic world of difference to me, and I'll explain in a second. Now, you also need to do the same thing for the map sensor. And even if you don't have E85, like in my case, when I first did this, I didn't, but then I later added a flex sensor. I went ahead and did this. So if I because maybe I started out at, you saw me multiply by 1.25. Maybe I changed it down to reverted it back to stock and then bumped it up 10%, or maybe it ended up on 20%. I can't remember. But either way, I wanted to keep all these things in sync. So if I ever did add an E85 sensor, I wouldn't have to remember, wait, did I multiply by 15% or 25%? So it's just easier to do that. If you have DOD, then obviously you're going to want to do the same thing as well. So now, right or wrong, like this is still just modeling about how much torque do we think we're making. It's not the same thing as this PID in the scanner. So at that point, now when we go in here to these transmission tables, and it's looking at the pressures. Let me go back. I lost myself. Shift pressures, up shift. So here we can say, oh, I'm actually, the old virtual volumetric efficiency tables, or sorry, virtual torque tables said I was making 111 foot-pounds. But since I've been modified, I'm actually, I think anyway, I'm making 221. I need to bump this pressure up. So this will have a huge impact on the transmission because it thinks more pressure is being created or more torque is being generated, so it needs more pressure as well. So bump these up in small increments. Now, a lot of people will say that this is a caution area and it can affect drivability, and especially if you go too high. But they never say why. Like, why is it so bad to overshoot it? And I think sometimes they'll say it'll pull power. Like if it thinks it's making too much power, it'll pull back power, or power that it's not making. But I think where this is coming from is on the engine side. So you go to the engine tab, torque management, and you can look at all of these things. Now I've pretty much maxed them out. Well, this is the factory tune, but all mine is set to the maximum, over 6,000 foot-pounds of torque. So again, factory, you're limiting here. It's not going to let you make more power, but on mine, it's maxed out. So if the virtual torque, if we go back, if I raise the virtual torque and it's virtual torque says, dude, you're making 150 foot-pounds, and whether I am or not, then the engine's going to look at the virtual torque table and say, well, how much timing do I need to pull out to get down to 85 foot-pounds? And so it's going to reduce power, which is something you don't want when you got you're racing a Mustang or some kind of snack pack, you want to beat them, right? And we don't want to have random timing pulled out or throttle being closed, because some of this traction control stuff and all this limiting can be controlled by the ignition as well as the throttle. So we definitely don't want that to happen. So all of these ones that you see in green here, these tables, they're all maxed out. Brake torque limit. You can see here factory 184, mine 6,000. So I can do a nice roasty, smoky burnout for all of these things. And so if I flipped it over here, and you can see all of these other ones are maxed out as well, to make sure that I don't get random timing pull going on. Of course, this has nothing to do with shifting in general, but you can see this is tying in engine torque management to virtual torque. So just understand virtual torque does have larger impacts than just this shifting that's going on in here. To further help you, now if you notice, if we go back here to the virtual torque, we have all of these tables, air mass and map. And so you're going to need to go through, if you want to start dialing in your virtual torque, go in your scanner, and you notice I have all of these set up the same way. I've created these histograms for air mass and map. I need to create the E85 ones, but just haven't. And so as you go through here, it's going to be pretty hard to get all of these cells filled in, especially when we have these jumps from -10 to 0 to +10. To alleviate that, and you can kind of see how I've set these up, I just use that torque PID, and I set up the columns and the rows the same way as the virtual torque tables. But in the filter area right here, this is for -10. And if I just put this equal to -10, chances of me getting exactly -10 is going to be few and far between. So in this case, I've said, well, just show me if it's between -8 and -12, show me that. That's what I want to see. And so all of these, like this one, just for example, because I think I had this as -2 to +2, I changed it ahead of time. If you want to be less selective, you can widen that up. In this case, -5 to +5. But in either way, you're going to need to put in some ranges in here so you can get some data. And, if these are close, I wouldn't mess with them. But otherwise, you can get an idea. So let's just take a look while we're here, see how close mine is. I have no idea. It's been a while since I've looked at this. So we're at +10 timing and 56 and 800 milligrams. So let's jump in and see. So we are at 10. What do we say? 56. Oh, we were at 80. So that looks pretty far off, actually, to me. I probably need to redo this. This is saying 261, right? So 56 and 80. Oh, wait, I'm on map. What a blunder. Oh, you know what? I need to open mine to see my virtual torque tables. It may not be so bad after all. Let's find out. Okay, so what did we say? 56 and 800. So 364. 56 and 800. So yeah, I'm pretty far off. So I need to adjust these tables. It's been a while since I've revisited them. They look like they're reporting too high. So that's something that I need to do. So you're going to have to go through all of these tables and get an idea of, do these match what the virtual torque is, and you're going to have to go through and adjust them as well. So that's how virtual torque plays into this. And so then after the shift, right, it'll jump out of the virtual torque, and then it will kind of go back to this steady state torque, wherever it went. This guy here, then that'll kind of be its operating model as well. So anyway, I hope this helps you guys figure out some more shifting type stuff. It's gonna take some time to um, go through the engine spark base here, and just figure out what works here in this drivability range, and then use that virtual torque table to figure out what's safe down here. And you can bump it up, add a little more torque over stock. Stock is overly safe for wide open And this is my table. Again, I am not suggesting that you copy this and set it up exactly like I have it. You need to figure out what works on your vehicle. I have no problem showing you this for reference, but you're going to have to dial it in and make it work on your car. That's why it's called tuning. You got to set it up for your hardware. Anyway, thanks for watching, and let me know what you think. And we got a few more videos to knock out for the 6L80, but we'll get through it. Anyway, have a good one. Bye. All right, guys, I almost forgot. I found a table that I wanted to talk about, and I totally neglected to. So I'm going to add this short add-on here at the end. So we were talking about primarily torque management is coming through on the spark table. On the engine side, you have base, and then you have the cap, this minimum final spark. So we're just throwing these numbers out here, and we don't really know the actual torque. Yes, we can reference virtual torque and get an idea. Hopefully, if virtual torque is accurate, that'll work. Unless you have a steady state dyno, blah, 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 who knows? So we're just blindly throwing this timing out here and hoping that it's right or good. But the transmission side actually has this table here, maximum shift torque, which in the factory settings on my car is maxed out, and it's still maxed out. It's unchanged, but it's kind of interesting. This is like a cap or a safety net. So if I wanted to say, hey, under no circumstances should I ever shift more than 200 foot-pounds. Well, if you recall from that PowerPoint where I did the exercise of mapping this out, this edge over here came out to like 420 foot-pounds or something ridiculous. So and rather than adjusting these numbers down, I could come in here and say, well, you know what? Let's just make sure it never shifts more than 200. I think ideally what would be really cool is to get rid of this whole timing table, just this three-dimensional table, and then replace it with these values. Because you can see we're only saying, well, in general, no matter what on the 1-2 shift, regardless of RPM or whatever, set it to 200. But what if instead of setting the timing, we could set all of these cells to unique values for the torque that we want to be commanded to shift? Obviously, that would require virtual torque to be spot on. But anyway, I thought this table was cool. And I may start experimenting with it and throwing it in the tune to see how it impacts. And who knows, maybe this is a table that was created but never implemented, and it's just kind of a dead appendix table, and changing it won't do anything. I don't know. So I'm curious if you have seen this table used in a factory tune or you have used it yourself successfully. I would like to know. Chime in and let me know your experience with this table. All right, enough of that. Back to your regularly scheduled program.